The city never really sleeps. At night it just hums, quieter, like a restless body tossing under heavy sheets. Neon lights flicker against rain-slick pavement, and in the shadows of glass towers a man who once ruled them all folds into himself. His breath comes in short, uneven bursts. His tailored suit is damp with sweat. His hands tremble against the cold bricks of an alley wall. Marcus Hale, a billionaire whose name graces skyscrapers, cannot breathe. His chest locks. His vision blurs. He whispers into the dark, barely a sound, just enough to break the silence. Help, please. Footsteps echo past the mouth of the alley. A couple, dressed for dinner, glance in but keep moving. A delivery rider swerves around a puddle, music blasting from his phone. Ignoring the hunched figure, the city has learned to look away, and Marcus, powerful, untouchable Marcus, vanishes into the same blind spot that swallows the forgotten. He slides down to the ground, knees hitting hard, gasping like a child who's lost air in his lungs. I can't. His voice cracks, his throat raw with panic. For a moment, it feels like the end will come here, faceless and unseen, in an alley between two dumpsters. The thought terrifies him more than death itself, that no one will know, no one will care. Then, a shuffle. Slow steps, uneven, dragging. A figure appears at the far end. A man wrapped in a threadbare coat, patches stitched in careful hands. His hair is wild, his beard flecked with gray. His eyes, though, are sharp, watchful, steady. He pauses, taking in the sight of Marcus collapsed. The billionaire's cufflinks gleam faintly under the streetlight, a cruel reminder of the gulf between them. But the man doesn't turn away. You all right, brother? His voice is low, warm, carrying none of the judgment Marcus expects. Marcus tries to answer but only chokes out. Can't breathe. The man crouches, close enough for Marcus to see the lines etched deep around his eyes. Look at me. Not at the ground. Look right here. He points to his own face. You're having a panic attack. You're not dying. Do what I say. Marcus blinks, desperate, clinging to the sound of authority in the stranger's tone. Breathe with me. In. The man inhales slowly, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Now out. Again. Come on. You can fix this. I'll help you. Marcus follows, shaky at first, then steadier, pulling air deep into his lungs, letting it spill back out. The world sharpens. His chest loosens. Tears he never meant to shed burn his eye. The man rests a hand lightly on his shoulder. Not heavy, not pitying, just present. There you go. Better. You see? Told you. You can fix it. Marcus stares at him, astonished. This was not supposed to be the man who saved him. Not someone the world steps over. Not someone society calls broken. Yet here, in the silence of the alley, dignity came from the street, and power lay crumpled on the ground. Marcus's breath still trembled in shallow bursts, his chest fighting him with every inhale. The world tilted, spinning. His suit felt suffocating, the silk tie like a noose. Then the stranger's voice cut through the chaos. Calm, certain, grounded. Listen to me, the man said again, slower now. You're not dying. It only feels that way. I've been here myself. Trust me. Marcus locked eyes with him, searching for mockery, but found none. Only a steady gaze weathered by storms Marcus had never known. Name's Daniel, the man added softly. What's yours? Marcus struggled to speak, the word catching in his throat. Marcus. All right, Marcus. Daniel said, as if the name wasn't attached to billions, as if it carried no power. We'll get you through this. Breathe with me. Just focus on the rhythm. That's all you need to do. He demonstrated again, slow inhale, long exhale, his chest rising and falling like an anchor in the storm. Marcus copied, shaky, tears spilling despite himself. There you go, Daniel whispered. That's better. You're stronger than this fear. You just forgot how to breathe through it. Marcus closed his eyes, following the rhythm, surprised by how the stranger's words landed. Not as commands, not as orders, but as truth spoken from lived pain. This was no corporate coach, no doctor in an expensive suit. Daniel spoke with the raw confidence of someone who had survived worse nights than Marcus could imagine. Minutes passed. The panic loosened its grip. Marcus's body, trembling moments before, began to calm. His heartbeat slowed. He drew in air without choking. Daniel crouched beside him still, hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "See? You fixed it. I only reminded you how." Marcus stared at him, confused, almost ashamed. "Why? Why did you stop? You don't even know me." Daniel gave a small smile. "Didn't have to. You needed help. That's enough." For Marcus, it was almost unbearable, being seen this way, vulnerable in front of a man society had cast aside. Yet strangely, he didn't feel judged. Instead, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hurt. And in that quiet alley, with the rain dripping from fire escapes above them, Marcus realized he was listening. Truly listening. Not as a billionaire, not as a man with influence, but as a human being desperate for calm. Daniel stood, stretching his stiff knees, and extended a hand. Marcus hesitated, then took it. Their fingers locked, one rough calloused from years on the street. The other smooth, manicured, weighed down by rings. Two worlds meeting in the smallest gesture. "Let's get you out of here," Daniel said. "The night air's not doing you any favors." For the first time in years, Marcus followed instead of leading. And he wondered what else might this man, who owned nothing, have to teach him. Marcus leaned against the cool brick, still unsteady. Daniel kept beside him, not hovering, not intruding, just present. For a man with so little, his presence filled the alley with calm. Marcus wasn't used to that. He was used to being the center, the one others waited on. "Where do you live?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Daniel chuckled softly. "You're standing in it. City's got plenty of open ceilings if you know where to look." Marcus blinked, unsettled. "On the street? Why? Why not?" Daniel shrugged. "Life pushed me out here. Didn't mean I stopped living." The simplicity cut Marcus deeper than expected. He thought of his penthouse overlooking the skyline, the silence that echoed through its empty rooms. A prison made of glass and marble. He shifted, uncomfortable. "Look, you don't have to stick around. I'll be fine." Marcus's tone carried the edge of pride, the reflex of someone who never showed weakness. Daniel tilted his head. "If that were true, you wouldn't be on the ground 5 minutes ago, whispering for help." The words weren't cruel, they were honest, brutally honest. For once Marcus didn't argue. Instead, silence stretched between them. The billionaire's polished shoes scuffed against the ground. Daniel's coat flapped lightly in the night breeze. Two men, worlds apart, bound in a moment neither had expected. "Come on," Daniel said after a beat. "There's a diner a block down. Cheapest coffee in the city. And you look like you could use something real." Marcus hesitated. The thought of walking into a fluorescent-lit diner with a homeless man, him Marcus Hale, felt absurd, but something in Daniel's voice disarmed him. A quiet authority. Minutes later, they slid into a cracked vinyl booth. The waitress barely looked up, setting down 2 chipped mugs. Daniel poured sugar packets in until the liquid turned nearly white. Marcus sipped black, bitter, unfamiliar in this place. For the first time in years, no one cared who he was. No one asked about profits or stock prices. No one bowed. It was strangely freeing. "You saved me back there," Marcus admitted at last. The words came awkwardly, like he was unused to gratitude. Daniel shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you how." A fragile bond formed in that quiet booth, between a man with nothing and a man with everything. And though Marcus didn't realize it yet, this night would mark the first time he chose to follow instead of command. Morning sunlight spilled through the towers bearing Marcus's name. Glass facades gleamed like monuments to ambition. Inside, the empire churned restlessly. Assistants clutching tablets, phones buzzing, meetings stacking back to back. His name carried weight. His presence drew silence, yet he walked through it all with a hollowness he couldn't shake. On the surface, Marcus Hale was untouchable. Billionaire. Visionary. A man who turned steel and glass into fortunes. But behind the gloss, his life was built on numbers, deadlines, and a gnawing hunger that success never fed. In the boardroom, his executives recited profit margins like gospel. Charts climbed, arrows pointed up, applause echoed, but Marcus sat at the head of the table, eyes distant, tapping his pen in a slow, restless rhythm. The more they praised him, the emptier he felt. "Marcus?" one executive prompted, snapping him back. "Your thoughts on expansion?" The room erupted in relief, as if his single word was divine approval. Marcus watched them, grown adults waiting for his blessing like anxious children. The control should have felt intoxicating. Instead, it felt suffocating. Nights were worse. Alone in his penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a city pulsing with life, but his reflection stared back hollow-eyed. Insomnia gnawed at him. He paced marble floors, replaying Daniel's steady voice in his mind. "You fixed it. I only reminded you how." It unsettled him. A man society ignored had reached him in a way wealth, power, and endless therapy had not. The next morning, he attended a charity gala. Crystal chandeliers, gowns shimmering, laughter spilling like champagne. Cameras flashed as he shook hands. Smiles stretched, words rehearsed. Yet when a young server dropped a tray of glasses and froze under scornful stares, Marcus flinched. He saw his own collapse in that split second. The panic, the shame. He wanted to kneel, to help, but pride held him rooted. Later in the limo, he rubbed his temples. "All this," he muttered, glancing at the skyline glittering like treasure, "and I can't breathe in it." The empire was vast, but it weighed heavy, and in the quiet of night, Marcus wondered if all his towers were nothing more than fragile walls built to keep out truths he couldn't face. Daniel woke before dawn, the city's chill biting through his coat. He folded the thin blanket he kept tucked under a grate and stretched aching joints. His mornings were simple: coffee from a shelter, scraps of wood collected from dumpsters, small repairs traded for change. Once he had been more than this. A carpenter with steady hands, crafting tables and cradles, building homes that held families. His work had touched lives, though few remembered his name. He had loved it, the smell of sawdust, the smooth grain of polished wood, but life had a way of breaking even the strongest beams. His wife's illness came first. Insurance denied, bills piling faster than wages. He worked double shifts, then triple, but medicine cost more than his hands could earn. He held her hand through the final nights, whispering promises he couldn't keep. Grief cracked him. Work slowed. Mistakes piled. A fall injured his back, and soon he was replaced. No severance, no cushion. Just a pink slip. Rent slipped behind. Doors closed. One by one, pieces of his life were stripped away until the street was all that remained. But Daniel did not break. He patched coats with fishing line, built makeshift stools from discarded crates, carved toys for kids in the shelters. People called him the fix-it man. If something was broken, Daniel tried. Not for money, but for dignity. Still, the world didn't see him. Drivers rolled windows up when he asked for spare change. Shopkeepers chased him off sidewalks. Passersby looked through him like fog. Yet Daniel carried himself with a quiet strength. Eyes steady, never begging, only offering. When he found Marcus in that alley, he hadn't seen a billionaire. He had seen another broken thing. Something he could try to fix. Later that night, as he sat by a fire barrel, Daniel thought of the strange man in the suit. He wondered if he'd ever see him again. Usually people like that walked back to their towers and forgot. But something told him Marcus was different. Because when Daniel looked into his eyes, past the panic, he had seen it, a man just as lost as he was, only trapped on the other side of glass. When Marcus returned to the alley the next evening, Daniel was there, sipping cheap coffee, warming his hands over a trash can fire. He didn't look surprised. "Knew you'd come back," Daniel said. Marcus frowned. "How?" "Because you looked like a man who's got everything, except peace. Those always circle back." Marcus exhaled sharply, half a laugh, half frustration. "You think you know me?" Daniel shook his head. "Don't need to. Pain's the same no matter what you're wearing." The words landed heavy. Marcus sat down on a crate, suit creasing against wood. For a moment, they just listened to the city hum. Daniel broke the silence. "I lost my wife because she couldn't afford the medicine. Insurance company said no. So the cancer said yes." His voice didn't tremble. It was flat, worn from retelling. Marcus stiffened. His own memory surged. His father, begging for a loan when Marcus was just a boy. Denied by the same kind of men Marcus would later become. He had sworn never to be powerless again. But in climbing, he had forgotten who he once was. "My father died the same way," Marcus admitted quietly. "Denied help, left with nothing." Daniel nodded slowly, eyes glinting with recognition. Two men, opposite ends of fortune, scarred by the same failing system. You and me, Daniel said softly. We're mirrors. You've got too much. I've got too little. But the wound underneath, it's the same. They sat in silence again, but this time it was different. Not strangers, not benefactor and beggar, but two broken men acknowledging the truth neither could ignore. Daniel led Marcus through a side street the next day. Ever eaten without a nameplate? Without people standing when you walk in? Marcus smirked. I don't usually eat in places like this. Exactly, Daniel replied. They entered a soup kitchen, the air thick with stew and quiet fatigue. Volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, handing bowls to lines of tired faces. Marcus hesitated, every eye on his tailored coat. Daniel nudged him forward. Take the tray. Sit down. Marcus obeyed. He sat among men and women whose clothes hung loose, whose eyes carried stories untold. No one asked who he was. No one cared. They ate in silence. The sound of spoons scraping bowls was louder than any boardroom applause. Marcus chewed slowly, each bite grounding him. Here, stripped of privilege, he was not Marcus Hale, billionaire. He was just another man with a bowl of soup. The silence was deafening, humbling. As Marcus lifted his spoon again, a phone camera clicked. A teenager at the far end whispered, "That's him, Marcus Hale." Whispers spread. Some stared in disbelief, others in awe. Within minutes, videos hit social media. Billionaire eats with homeless man. Marcus felt the weight of eyes, the judgment, the curiosity. Daniel leaned in, voice low. Ignore them. This is bigger than cameras. But the internet roared. Comments flooded in. Some mocking, some praising. Memes spread. News outlets replayed the clip. For Marcus, what began as private reflection had erupted into spectacle. And somewhere, the movement stirred. Born not in a boardroom, but in a soup kitchen silence, captured by a stranger's lens. The boardroom gleamed with polished wood and glass, a temple to power. Screens lit up with charts and headlines, all showing the same thing. Marcus Hale sitting in a soup kitchen, eating beside men in ragged coats. The clip looped on repeat, as if to mock him. Unbelievable, one director spat, slamming a hand on the table. Do you have any idea what this has done to investor confidence? Around the long table, suits shifted restlessly. Phones buzzed with incoming calls. Stock tickers crawled across the screens, red arrows pointing down. Shares dropped 3 points overnight, another added, her voice sharp. Billions in market value gone because you decided to play saint with a homeless man. Marcus sat at the head, silent. He had weathered financial storms before, seen markets crash and rebound. But this was different. This was personal. One of the older board members leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. We built this empire on strength, Marcus, on certainty, not pity. Compassion is weakness, and weakness gets punished. Murmurs of agreement rippled. Some avoided Marcus's gaze. Others looked at him openly, disappointment etched deep. Marcus finally spoke, his tone calm. Weakness? Is it weakness to sit with the people our society forgets? To see them as human beings? The room bristled. A younger executive scoffed. We're not a charity, Marcus. We answer to shareholders, not sob stories. Betrayal stung sharper than he expected. These were men and women who had praised his every word, who had built their careers in his shadow. Now they turned on him, as though his humanity were a crime. One director tapped a tablet. Headlines are brutal. Hale loses grip. Billionaire breaks down. Rivals are circling. If you don't distance yourself from this man, we risk collapse. Daniel's voice echoed in Marcus's memory. You're not dying. It only feels that way. He steadied his breath. Maybe collapse is what this empire deserves, Marcus said quietly. The words landed like glass shattering. The room erupted. You're out of line. Reckless. Are you trying to destroy us? The chaos swelled. Voices overlapping. Accusations flung like knives. Yet Marcus remained still, hands folded, eyes steady. He saw them clearly now, not as allies, but as vultures guarding carcasses of profit. Enough, Marcus said, cutting through the noise. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. If our empire cannot withstand compassion, then it is built on nothing. I will not apologize for being human. Silence followed, stunned and heavy. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others glared, seething. Marcus stood, pushing back his chair. The polished floor echoed with each step toward the door. Behind him whispers rose, plotting, panicked. Betrayal hung thick in the air. For the first time, Marcus realized his greatest threat wasn't competition or markets. It was the very empire he had built. The night after the boardroom erupted, Marcus didn't return to his penthouse. He found himself back at the alley, as if his feet had chosen for him. Daniel sat on a crate, tinkering with a broken radio, his hands patient and steady. "You look like you wrestled with wolves," Daniel said without looking up. Marcus exhaled, sitting heavily on the opposite crate. "My board. They think I've lost my mind. Compassion doesn't fit on a balance sheet." Daniel twisted a wire, sparks flickering. "That's because they don't know what real leadership looks like." Marcus frowned. "And you do." Daniel finally met his gaze. His eyes weren't harsh, just certain. Leadership isn't about profit. It's about dignity. Keeping people whole when everything else tries to break them. Marcus rubbed his temples. Dignity doesn't pay salaries. It doesn't keep lights on. "Maybe not," Daniel said, voice calm, "but it keeps people alive inside. Money without dignity is just chains made of gold." The words struck deep. Marcus had spent years chained to numbers, his empire built on quarterly reports. Yet when the panic attack hit, none of that wealth had saved him. It had been this man, this so-called nobody, who reminded him how to breathe. Daniel leaned back, wiping grease from his fingers. "Out here, survival isn't numbers, it's resilience. You share your bread. You watch someone's back while they sleep. You fix what you can because you know tomorrow might break again." Marcus swallowed hard. "I've been leading wrong my entire life." Daniel shook his head. "Not wrong, just blind. You were taught that strength is control, but real strength is care. The kind nobody applauds because it doesn't show up on a stock chart." Marcus whispered, almost to himself, "Dignity over profit." Daniel nodded. "That's leadership. You want loyalty. You give people dignity. You want legacy. Build something that makes sure no one falls the way we did." For Marcus, the words were both indictment and invitation. He had been praised as a visionary, but Daniel's quiet truths showed him what vision really meant. When he finally rose to leave, Marcus felt lighter, not because his problems had vanished, but because Daniel had given him something he hadn't felt in years. The compass. And for the first time, Marcus wondered if his empire could be rebuilt on more than profit. The video of Marcus at the soup kitchen refused to fade. Days passed, and instead of dying down, it spread like wildfire. On phones, in headlines, across dinner tables, it became the clip everyone debated. Some mocked him. Weak, one pundit sneered on television. "A billionaire humbled by beggars." Pathetic. Memes circulated, showing Marcus in a paper hat, captions calling him CEO of soup. But others saw something else. Students posted, "He's finally seeing what we live every day." Mothers wrote, "If a billionaire can sit with the forgotten, why can't our leaders?" Hashtags trended worldwide. "Don fix it." "Quiet power." "Dignity first." The focus shifted, surprisingly, toward Daniel. Clips of him speaking at the table, steady, unpolished, honest, were replayed. Leadership isn't profit, it's dignity. Those words were shared thousands of times, then millions. Suddenly Daniel was no longer invisible. His name surfaced in conversations, his face appearing in posts, his voice carried by people who had never met him. Marcus watched from his penthouse, scrolling through the chaos. Every insult burned, but every show of support lit something inside him. For years, his empire had controlled narratives. Now the story belonged to strangers with phones. At a press conference, a reporter asked bluntly, "Are you the billionaire who thinks soup lines are leadership?" Laughter rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Marcus stood taller, heart pounding. "I am the man who sat with people our system forgets. If that makes me weak in your eyes, so be it. But to me it makes us human." The clip exploded online. Supporters cheered. Detractors scoffed. The division deepened, but the conversation could no longer be silenced. Daniel, meanwhile, remained in the shadows of the city. Yet he became an unlikely symbol. His quiet wisdom turned into slogans on protest signs. His story, once invisible, became the roar of a movement. The boardroom turned colder each day. Executives whispered in corners. Lawyers shuffled papers. Alliances shifted like sand. Marcus could feel it, the empire he had built now circling to devour him. His right-hand man, Ellis, The sharp-eyed strategist who had once sworn loyalty now led the quiet rebellion. In private calls, Ellis painted Marcus as unstable. He's distracted, emotional, unfit to lead. Emails leaked. Anonymous tips spread to financial outlets. Rumors grew that Marcus had lost his grip, that his compassion was costing millions. Shareholders panicked. Rivals salivated, and behind polished glass doors, Ellis crafted the coup. Marcus knew. He saw the glances, heard the clipped tones. Yet he remained still, watching. He remembered Daniel's words. Real strength is care. If Ellis wanted to play by the old rules, Marcus would not. But the pressure mounted. Investors demanded explanations. The media called for his resignation. Even allies began to distance themselves, desperate to preserve their own reputations. For Marcus, betrayal didn't come as a surprise. It came as confirmation. The system he had once mastered was a beast that consumed even its masters. And now, it wanted to consume him. Sleep came in fragments. Marcus found himself pacing his penthouse, staring at old photographs tucked away in drawers. His father's face stared back, tired, lined, proud despite everything. He remembered the nights when bill collectors pounded on their door. His father pleading with banks, denied over and over. The shame that hung in the house when they lost it. Marcus had sworn then never to be powerless again. But as he stared at the skyline, he realized something terrifying. His wealth hadn't freed him. It had only chained him differently. Fear still ruled him. Fear of loss. Fear of weakness. Fear of being seen as less. Daniel's face flashed in his mind. Calm. Certain. Unafraid of judgment. That was freedom. Marcus whispered into the empty room. Father, I built all this to protect myself, and it's killing me the same way it killed you. Daniel led Marcus through parts of the city he had never dared step. Tent camps sprawled under bridges, blankets spread across cold concrete, shelters overflowed, lines stretching down blocks, veterans, mothers, children, faces weary, yet enduring. Here's the real city, Daniel said quietly. Not the one you see from a penthouse window. Marcus watched a man carve scraps of wood into toys for children. A woman shared her sandwich with 3 strangers. Survival, yes, but also kindness. Each face told a story of resilience, of humanity stripped bare yet unbroken. Marcus felt his chest tighten, not with panic this time, but with shame and awe. See? Daniel murmured. These people aren't weak. They're stronger than anyone in your boardroom. They've learned to live without the armor you think you need. For Marcus, it was a revelation. The city he thought he owned had never truly belonged to him. The press gathered, cameras crowding like vultures. Marcus stepped onto the stage, Daniel beside him, their contrast striking, one in a tailored suit, the other in a patched coat. Microphones thrust forward. Questions hurled. Marcus raised a hand. Silence fell. His voice was steady. Homelessness is not failure. It is proof of a system that fails its people. He gestured to Daniel. This man reminded me of what leadership really means. Not profits, dignity, care, humanity. The cameras rolled. The world listened. And for the first time, Marcus used his platform not to protect his empire but to challenge it. The backlash was swift. Headlines screamed, Hale betrays his class. Media outlets painted Daniel as a conman, digging into every scrap of his past. Commentators sneered, calling Marcus unhinged. Corporations pulled partnerships. Shareholders threatened lawsuits. Smear campaigns flooded the airwaves. Marcus's phone rang non-stop, allies urging him to recant, to distance himself. But he didn't. Daniel, however, felt the sting most. Strangers spat at him, accusing him of manipulating Marcus. His name, once unknown, was now cursed in tabloids. Yet through the fire, their bond held. And in the crucible of retaliation, their cause only grew stronger. It began with a small march, then another. Within weeks, streets filled with voices, students, workers, church groups, families. Signs read, dignity over profit, fix it, quiet power. Daniel stood at the center, overwhelmed. Ordinary citizens rallied not for him but with him. His words had become their own. Marcus watched from the steps of City Hall, awe in his chest. What started as an alley whisper had become a roar shaking walls of power. The movement was no longer about one man. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't matter. And this time, The world could not look away. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, marble columns rising against a gray sky. Crowds gathered on the steps, signs raised high, cameras flashing. Inside, the air was thick with tension, as if justice itself were holding its breath. Marcus walked through metal detectors, flanked by lawyers in dark suits. He no longer wore the armor of arrogance, only a steady calm. Daniel followed a few steps behind, coat patched, hands clasped, the unlikely companion whose whisper had set all this in motion. The hearing was not about him, not about panic attacks in alleys or soup kitchens gone viral. It was about something larger, the empire Marcus had built, and the rot festering inside it. The prosecution laid it bare. Whistleblowers stepped forward one by one. A former accountant testified about hidden losses disguised as gains. A secretary revealed emails pressuring staff to bury safety concerns. A mid-level manager admitted entire departments were gutted for profit, their workers discarded like scrap. Screens lit up with documents, charts twisted into lies. Numbers rewritten to appease shareholders while real families suffered the cuts. This is the culture Marcus Hale created, one lawyer declared, his voice ringing across the chamber. A culture where profit mattered more than people, where compassion was punished and exploitation rewarded. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Journalists scribbled furiously, fingers flying across keyboards. The world was watching, millions streaming live, eyes glued to screens. Marcus sat still, jaw tight. He didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, because he knew. Much of it was true. He had signed the papers, nodded at the expansions, rewarded the men who cut corners. He had told himself it was necessary, the cost of power. Now those costs stared back at him in black and white. Then came the twist. Whistleblowers who spoke not against Marcus, but for him. Employees who claimed his recent shift had frightened those who thrived on exploitation. That once he began questioning practices, once he sat at that soup kitchen table, the knives came out. One young woman's voice trembled as she spoke. I leaked documents because I believed he had finally seen us. Not as workers, not as numbers, as people. The room shifted. The case was no longer simple. It was not only about guilt, it was about transformation. Could a man who had upheld the system now dismantle it? The judge's gavel struck, calling order. Yet the eyes of the courtroom told the real story. Some burned with anger. Some glimmered with hope. All demanded accountability. And in that chamber, Marcus realized the truth. What began as a whisper in an alley had grown into a roar shaking the foundations of an empire. There was no turning back. When Daniel's name was called, murmurs filled the courtroom. The man in the patched coat, the one who once lived invisible under bridges, was now asked to testify before lawmakers. He rose slowly, each step deliberate, dignity in his stride. He took the oath, hands steady, eyes calm. No lawyer coached him, no notes clutched in his hands, only truth. Daniel Brooks, he said clearly, and your occupation. Daniel's lips curved faintly. These days, fixing what I can. Sometimes radios, sometimes people. Soft laughter rippled. Even the judge's stern face flickered with surprise. The questions came sharp. Did Marcus manipulate him? Was he paraded as a symbol? Did he seek gain from their alliance? Daniel met each with the same unwavering tone. I didn't fix Marcus Hale. He fixed himself. I only reminded him he could. Silence followed, heavy with the weight of honesty. He spoke of nights on the street, of patching torn coats with fishing line, of sharing bread with strangers who had less than nothing. He spoke of losing his wife because medicine cost more than a carpenter's wage. His voice never cracked. It was not pity he sought, but recognition. Homelessness, he said firmly, isn't a disease of laziness. It's the proof of a system that drops people when they break. And when enough people break, the system itself is broken. Pens froze mid-scratch. Cameras zoomed tighter. Lawmakers tried to corner him. Are you suggesting business should abandon profit? Daniel shook his head. I'm suggesting profit without dignity is just theft with a nice suit. Real leadership doesn't measure success by stock charts, but by how many people don't fall through the cracks. Applause broke out in the gallery before the gavel struck for silence. Daniel turned his gaze to the bench. His eyes burned, not with anger, but with clarity. I am not here as a victim. I am here as a survivor. And I am demanding, not asking, that this body stop treating people like numbers. Because numbers don't bleed. People do. Gasps echoed. Even Marcus, seated behind him, felt his chest tighten. The man who once knelt in an alley to steady his breath was now steadying an entire nation. The prosecutor leaned back, defeated. Daniel had said more in minutes than they could in hours. When he stepped down, the gallery rose to its feet. Some clapped. Others wept. Phones shot upward, streaming live. Across the world, millions heard the words of a man no one had noticed before. And as Daniel returned to his seat, the truth was undeniable. He had spoken not for himself, not for Marcus, but for everyone who had ever been broken and left behind. The hearings dragged on for weeks, but the ripple was undeniable. Daniel's testimony, Marcus's admissions, the avalanche of whistleblower evidence, all of it cracked open doors that had long been bolted shut. What began as an alley whisper now demanded to be carved into law. The first announcements came cautiously, spoken through stiff lips at press briefings. New measures are being considered, officials said. But the tide had already shifted. Citizens filled streets with signs. Hashtags blazed across every screen. Fix it. Dignity first. Quiet power. What once was a billionaire's humiliation had become a movement no institution could afford to ignore. Legislators convened. Bills were drafted at a pace the city had never seen. Proposals long dismissed as unrealistic suddenly gained traction. Affordable housing programs expanded, funded not by scraps, but by serious commitment. Empty properties once left to rot or serve as tax shelters were converted into shelters and apartments for families with nowhere else to go. Healthcare protections followed. Insurance companies, long shielded by loopholes, were forced into accountability. A law passed requiring coverage of critical medications, closing the door that had cost Daniel, his wife, and Marcus's father their lives. The applause in the chamber was thunderous, but outside it was the tears of ordinary people that marked the true victory. Next came corporate reforms. Transparency laws stripped away the hidden ledgers Marcus's empire had once relied on. CEOs were called to testify under oath, forced to answer not just to shareholders, but to citizens. Whistleblowers received legal protection, their courage no longer punished but honored. For the first time in decades, institutions that had once stood untouchable bowed under the weight of human dignity. Newspapers ran headlines declaring, "The system bends." Anchors spoke of a cultural shift, one sparked not by politicians, but by a homeless man who refused to let silence win. Marcus stood at press conferences, no longer the titan above reproach, but a man humbled. "This isn't about me," he repeated each time. "This is about us. All of us. We cannot measure success by wealth while people freeze in alleys or die without medicine. We must measure by dignity." Daniel, reluctant at first, found himself speaking too. Small groups at first, church basements, schools, community centers. His words carried the same quiet authority that had once steadied Marcus in that dark alley. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The country leaned closer to hear. Of course, not everyone welcomed the change. Corporations fought tooth and nail, funding campaigns to slow reforms. Politicians sneered, calling it theatrics. But the momentum was too strong. Public opinion roared, louder than lobbyist checks. In city after city, posters went up. Respect is the standard. Dignity is the law. Murals appeared on brick walls. Daniel's face, not as a saint, but as a reminder. The man once invisible was now a symbol, not of pity, but of resilience. And for Marcus, every reform carried weight beyond policy. It was proof his father's death had not been in vain, that Daniel's wife's struggle had not been forgotten. The cracks in the system were not fully repaired, but for the first time, they were being mended with intention. The system had bent, and though it resisted, though it creaked and groaned under the weight of reform, it did not break. It was reshaped by dignity, by truth, by voices that once had none. The city street buzzed with life. Vendors called out. Children laughed. Buses rumbled past. Amid the rhythm of ordinary day, two figures walked side by side. Marcus Hale, no longer carrying the armor of untouchable wealth, and Daniel Brooks, no longer cloaked in the invisibility of homelessness. They moved without entourage, without cameras. Yet people noticed. Strangers paused mid-step. Some nodded in respect. Others smiled softly. The child tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "That's them." Daniel caught Marcus's glance, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like you've become famous after all." Marcus shook his head. "No, we became something else." The world remembered them differently now, not as billionaire and beggar, but as men who had stood together when silence was easier. Their story had been told in headlines, in hashtags, in viral videos replayed millions of times. But what lingered in the streets wasn't fame. It was legacy. A young man approached timidly, phone in hand. "Sir, Mr. Brooks, your words, they helped me. I was ready to give up. Now I'm back in school." His eyes glistened. Daniel clasped his shoulder gently. "You fixed yourself," he said, the same words he had once given Marcus. Moments like these multiplied. A veteran saluted quietly. A nurse pressed a thank you note into Marcus's hand. Families waved from apartment balconies, apartments made possible by the reforms that had begun with a whisper. They stopped at a mural painted across a brick wall. Bright colors swirled into the image of two figures, one in a suit, one in a patched coat, both walking forward together. Above them the words read, "Fix it." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Do you ever think about that night?" The alley, Daniel's eyes softened. "Every day. Not because of what happened to you. Because of what it showed me, that even the highest towers can fall, and even the lowest voices can rise." Silence lingered, filled not with emptiness, but with weight. Around them, life bustled on. But within that stillness, the enormity of what they had sparked settled in. For Marcus, the path ahead was no longer about empire or legacy in the traditional sense. It was about continuing to bend systems toward dignity. For Daniel, it was never about recognition. His joy came from knowing the forgotten were finally being seen. As they resumed walking, children waved from across the street. One shouted, "Thank you, Mr. Fix-It." The nickname made Daniel laugh, shaking his head. "Never thought that'd stick." Marcus grinned. "Some legacies are better than the ones we plan." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. The two men, once strangers from opposite worlds, walked in step, symbols not of wealth or poverty, but of what happens when dignity speaks louder than profit. Their journey had begun with a whisper in an alley, a man gasping for air, another kneeling beside him. It ended not with towers or titles, but with something greater. Children waving, strangers nodding, a city remembering. Legacy, they realized, wasn't carved in glass towers or written in balance sheets. It was carried in people, in reforms, in the quiet power of dignity made real. And as they disappeared into the crowd, their story remained not theirs alone anymore, but everyone's.